Greetings from Iowa. The wind blew me in yesterday. It was a good trip. Again, I retired a year ago, but I missed you. This is what I enjoyed as I spent 21 years at Iowa State. We got an early retirement option. I'm good. My message is designed to stimulate your thought process. I'm not an expert, all right? You're going to see I'm going to make some references to people like Gary Schnitke, and I'm going to use Illinois data. And if you need to contact me, my university email address still works. I teach an online class. But rather than 80 meetings in a winter, I do 25. So I'm more rested than I've ever been in Springfield. And I'll be a part of facilitating the panel. So grab your handout and let's go. Let's go hard and let's go fast. Let's talk about crop supply demand. Let's use the baseline work that USDA came out with on November 5th. 480 corn, 1050 beans, cash for the 22-23 marketing year. And then I'll transition to what I think is the hottest topic of the winter. How are we going to manage these costs? And these margins, they're going to be so much tighter in 22, especially with higher fertilizer cost and uncertainty of cash rental rates. And then I'm going to prepare you for a final exam. It's coming in March. It's about March 15th. It's crop insurance. Because there are tools that can help you manage this revenue risk that you might not have even heard of. Shallow loss products like margin protection, supplemental coverage option, SCO. But if you take SCO, you can't take ARC County. Or ECO, enhanced coverage option. There are tools out there, if you will explore, can benefit managing the risk that's coming at you. So with that, I'm just going to pull out WASDE data. And you know WASDE is the World Agriculture Supply Demand Estimate. Comes out about once a month. Big one coming out January 12th. And so I'm just going to go back the last 2 years. And we call these estimates. And then when we move forward and we haven't measured anything, we call these projections. You said, how would you define a projection? A wild-ass guess. Okay, because nobody's measured anything. Nobody knows how many acres you're going to plant. They don't know how many bushels per acre. So this is what the same 23-member World Ag Outlook Board provided as the baseline on November 5th. Now, I made some adjustments, but where I want you to look on the right-hand column is the reality. We probably aren't going to plant a lot more corn acres, but I question that. I'm from Iowa, and we tore up a lot of dirt the last 4 weeks. See, we were dry all year. And our corn yield's only going to be 201, where yours is 207. That's an estimate. But because we had this dry fall, we prepared a lot more ground to plant corn. And we got 43 ethanol plants. We're going to plant a lot of corn. So don't be surprised on June 30th that number is higher than 92. But we're going to use the 30-year trend yield. That's 181. We're measuring that with that 30-year projection. It's just the trend yield, all right, from that period of time. But we're setting up that I think 22 could be a good year for corn and for soybeans because we've got great demand. We've got demand for the corn for feed and fuel and exports. But for the next hour, I want you to put a number under your hat. Gordon, you got to put your hat on to put the number under your hat. The number is 480 cash corn. I'm going to use it several times. I don't know. I don't know. I don't know. That's the marketing year average. That's the one that determines whether you get a PLC payment. You got to be below 370 to get a PLC, so there's no PLC payments for the 22 crop. So I think we're setting ourselves up for the likelihood is we're going to see a lot of volatility. But I think corn is caught in a sideways trading range. It's about 40 cents for the nearby March corn contract, and it's about 30 cents for the new crop December 22 contract. So again, just a quick review, all right? It was the weather in the 20 crop and the tremendous demand, especially from China in phase 1. And we got a trade deal with Japan, and we got a trade deal with Canada and Mexico. We forgot about those. It was this demand for the 20 crop and the 21 crop that set us up. But if we grow that many acres and harvest that at a trend line yield, ending stocks go up, and the price likely goes down, but we're not falling out of bed. It probably, of the 10 years I've been here, only 11 and 12 and 13 would we ever say that prices at 480 are low. These are relatively good prices if you really set back and understand the scheme. But here's what I've been bringing every year that I've been here, presenting for Farm Credit Illinois. What are the seasonals? Where do we tend to see the high futures prices? So I'm going to turn to another land-grant university, a Big Ten university, Minnesota. This is Ed Ussett. You probably see him write. You probably see him on programs. Every year what Ed does is he takes December corn futures and index it to 100. And so here's the last, if you would, 21 years. And he looks at where the highs occur. And over this 21-year period, it's pretty obvious. The highs like to occur in April, May, June. About 85% of the time, the high tick will be in April, May, June. This year, it was May 7th, right on time. And so don't talk yourself out of this, what we call the seasonals. This is where you want to make sure you finish up your new crop sales and make sure you've got adequate bushels sold pre-harvest. And I'm never backing away from that number. And I know that 11 was an outlier, and 12 was an outlier, and 20 was an outlier. But about 85% of that 21-year period, the highs tend to be in the spring because it's the greatest uncertainty of growing that northern hemisphere crop where 85% of the corn's produced. So as we kind of frame this up, the high prices were probably right this marketing year, 545 corn. All right, best guess. Projection, 480. For beans, it's a little more drastic drop in bean price. Prepare yourself accordingly. USDA, World Ag Outlook Board, is using 1050. So put that number under your hat for an hour and lock in on this idea that maybe cash prices for the 22 crop, 22-23 marketing year, maybe 480 corn and 1050 beans, because prices today on the board are much higher than that. All right, we're around 550 December 22 corn. We're around 1230 for November 22 beans. And that is really the segue for today's message. So when we look at the bean numbers, you might question, how will we ever get bean prices that low? And the answer is South America. Now, Eric Snodgrass is not on the program with me. We've done a lot of training. I watch his videos. I just watched his Tuesday morning video on South American weather. And it's hot and it's dry. But it's a pretty small area. It's southern Brazil. It's Uruguay and Paraguay. Northeastern Argentina. It's really not that large of an area, but it's a very important growing area. So what USDA is saying is maybe the bean acres go up a little bit. The trend yield's around 51.5, but we've got great demand. Great crush a record-sized hog herd, and poultry flocks. And we need the dry distiller's grain from these ethanol plants to supplement the livestock industry as well as exports. So maybe the question is this: how do stocks to use go down, but the price goes down? South America. Record Brazil corn, record Brazil beans already forecast. They're going to start harvesting in about 2 weeks. And they've had great growing conditions, especially the northern two-thirds of Brazil. And so when I look at that number, my gut says it looks low. If I had to personally say, what do you think that'll be? I think it'll probably be closer to 11, my personal belief, unless we get into some geopolitical issue. You know, I think the black swan are things that we have no idea. My youngest son's a mechanical engineer, studied at Iowa State University. And he's got his MBA, and he works as a defense contractor. His specialty is nuclear weapons. And I can't talk about anything that he knows because he never tells me. But he wanted to schedule his vacation. He's got 4 kids, they're all under 12. And so he scheduled his vacation for the middle of July. This is a joke. And I said, oh, by the middle of July, Russia will probably be in the Ukraine, and China will probably be in Taiwan. Do you see it? There's a lot of things outside that we don't know that adds to this volatility. And so based on what USDA saw, maybe ending stocks come down and price comes down. And a lot depends on South America. And they're in front of us. They're right out our windshield right now. So I think weather and use are the driving factors. When we look at the same seasonal data for soybeans, we've got to pull out years where we had extremely low prices. So I'm going to pull out 4 of those years. University of Minnesota data, November soybean futures every year indexed to 100. And it still looks like the highs like to sit in the spring, but South America has a big play on this baby. If we have record South American bean crop forecast, 142 million metric ton with harvest in 2 weeks, then the likelihood is maybe these seasonals aren't as reliable. Maybe they're 60 or 65% reliable over the 17-year period. So I don't like to bet the farm that the highs are still going to sit in the spring, but they were in 21. They were June 7th. May 7th corn, June 7th beans, high tick for this marketing year. The highs like to sit in the spring where there's a great uncertainty for the northern hemisphere crop, but 55% of the soybeans are produced in the southern hemisphere. So sometimes the highs can occur in this December, January time frame. Acres are going to be a big swing, and I've already talked to Farm Journal this week, and they're saying, oh yeah, we're going to spend a lot of time talking about acres, but nobody knows how many acres U.S. farmers will plant. I was up in South Dakota a couple weeks ago, and my gosh, they're planting spring wheat. They're planting sunflowers. I mean, they've got so many other choices besides corn and soybeans. And there is more winter wheat in South Dakota than I've seen in the last 5 years. In Iowa, we call it cover crop. In South Dakota, they call it winter wheat. So we're going to get this impact of these increased winter wheat acres, and that's 2 million higher than it was the previous year. But maybe some of those acres don't produce wheat. And maybe they collect crop insurance and they get torn up, and those are bean acres. We don't know that because this weather, it was 73 in Des Moines yesterday, the record. The warmest December day in history. Our cover crops came out of dormancy, started growing again. That'll be hard on some of this winter wheat. In the CRP program, it's just not going to motivate a lot of people to say, well, yeah, I think I'll take some farm ground and I think I'll put that In the CRP program, I don't think so. You've got record farmland values. Iowa came out 2 days ago with the most reliable land value survey in the nation. What did it say? 29% increase in 1 year. 29 in 1 year. I mean, when we adjust for inflation, we're back to the 70s. We've never seen this type of impact. If we use nominal values, we're at records. If we use inflation adjusted, we're kind of back to where we were in maybe 2013. So what it brings us to is this idea. It's more of the global perspective of weather. And every month, we get this baby updated. It's compiled by Columbia University. They don't have a dog in the fight. They're not a land grant, but they're a research university. And this is data that's publicly available. It'll be released on the 19th of the month every month. Since the 19th is on a Sunday, it'll be out on Monday, and you can go to that website. You can find it. This was their winter forecast, released November 19th. It basically says that in the U.S., probably going to be a neutral to dry winter. Only the Pacific Northwest would probably see more than average rainfall. But put your eyes right there, because that is where the market's focused. It's focused on South America. This is a La Nina growing season. And La Nina tells us that we tend to be warmer and drier here. But look at Brazil, tends to be wetter. But the spot the market's focused on right now is right there in southern Brazil, in Paraguay, and Uruguay, and northeast Argentina. I thought, how could you compare this? This would be like a drought in the Dakotas in Minnesota. Ah! If you were in the Dakotas in Minnesota, you wouldn't like that. If you're in Illinois, good place for a drought. This is probably not that bad a place. This is not going to take out the major Mato Grosso and soybean producing areas. The crop's probably going to be harvested a little earlier than normal. But we're already hearing in Argentina, corn did not get off to a good start. And that's where we see more full season corn because of inflation. You think inflation in this country at 6.8% is bad? Try 50% in Argentina. You couldn't even imagine what that would be like. And so Argentina, we're not really sure what we get. And the likelihood is they don't want to sell those soybeans because of the inflationary pressure and the taxes that come on it. But places like Australia, record wheat. South Africa grows a lot of corn, and probably near record. So I like this, what I call La Nina, El Nino, Enso. It's the measurement of water temperatures in the Central Pacific. This is going back to the 40s. We've had buoys out measuring these. And these are extremely cool weather conditions. But this is the release that came out last week from Columbia University. It says that La Nina fades, and it fades fast. And this has changed in the last month. La Nina is fading fast. And by the time we get to March, we're probably not even under the influence of La Nina. We're probably going to Enso neutral. So when you put your crop in the ground, all right, we're probably going to be neutral. That's where we were in 17 when Illinois set the record corn yield. Tends not to be adverse. La Ninas tend to be hotter and drier summers. Neutral summers aren't necessarily that bad. And what we'd really like to see, El Nino influence increase. That tends to be when we get our great closes to our crops. So again, too much speculation. about weather to know that the market's rewarding sales now. I think we're going to see a lot of resistance in the nearby March corn contract, about a nickel higher than they are today. I think $6 is a cap on March corn futures. We've ran to $5.95 twice and can't get over it. So I'm saying reward the market. If you've got corn, you need to move it. If you don't need the income this year, defer the income. The best basis of the winter is probably out your back door right now. These ethanol plants have got to be fed. So delivering corn over Christmas, looking out at your bid over the next 2 weeks is a great opportunity. It is selling corn, generating cash flow, reducing the risk that comes with the global and economic political issues that are still out here. When I look at beans, South America's making the call. We're right at a resistance level right now, 13. I just think we're going to struggle with this large Brazilian crop. And so when we run this market up here to $12.75 today, the nearby January, and there's only 12-cent carry between January and July, there's no carry in the corn market. There's a little bit of carry in the bean market, and I don't have a problem with holding some bushels back for spring. We might see some basis opportunities because we're going to have to feed the feedlots, and we're going to have to feed these ethanol plants. So I think we're going to see trading ranges set up. So let's talk about this segue. I call 21-22 the tale of two cities. It was the best of times. It was the worst of times. You read that book too, didn't you? I think 21, as noted by the Economic Research Service, is going to be the second or third best net farm income in history. Only 13, and maybe 14. You are living a dream, baby. Dad didn't get to live these times. For sure, Grandpa never lived these times. These are record net farm income years. At 21, that 545 average cash price, Illinois average yield, sourced USDA NASS 207. Only one other year, 17. Were you higher than that? So I did a Gary Snitke. He's going to be here, I think, on the program, isn't he? January 18th. I think Gary's coming back here. So I did a Gary Snitke. I'm going to pick averages. I'm going to pick an average Illinois yield. I'm going to say this is a central Illinois farm, and it's good quality land. All right. And this is probably land that's going to cash rent for Snitke Day to 270. So I'm going to use Gary's release in July for the cost. So I'm looking at what is the farmer return for 21 average. Average yield, average price, average non-land cost, average cash rent. That was the survey in August that Gary and the Society of Farm Managers and Rural Appraisers came up with. Farmer net return, 251. Hey now, give me 252. That's pretty damn good. And that includes cash rent. Fast forward, 22. What happens in 22? Average yield. And this is a county yield. This is not your county yield, but I would say I'm probably 5 bushels light. You said, what is that number? That is the 30-year trend yield for every county. You're going to need it for SEO and ECO and margin protection. 30-year trend yields are the county yields used for crop insurance, shallow loss products. I'm going to plug in the 480. Remember, that's that number that's under my hat. Wild ass guess. I'm going to multiply those two, and I don't think we're going to get any insurance proceeds or government farm programs, ARC PLC payments at 480. We got to be below 370 to collect PLC. And I think the ad hoc payments are gone. That's a good run, wasn't it? That was a great run. We got the market facilitation program back in 18 and 19, and then we got the PPP there in 20, and the government just kept throwing money at us, just suddenly show up in our accounts, and that's gone. We're going to have to make it from the marketplace. Schnitke data, average cost of production, growing corn in central Illinois, up 11%. He'll update that data next month. I bet it goes higher. In July, Schnitke could not have seen what was going to happen to fertilizer costs. Could not have seen that. And Gary's the smartest Ohio farm boy I know. So the reality is these costs are creeping higher, but I'll use the data. And then I'll plug in the $2.99 cash rent. That came from the survey they did in August and was released by the farm managers and rural appraisers. Net farmer return, minus $2. Excuse me? If you're just average and you're paying cash rent of $2.99, you could lose money. It's not a lot of money. Hopefully you own your own land, free and clear. Hopefully you already booked your fertilizer and got it on. Some of you are like, yeah, woo, that was key. So I can see this negative story, and it feeds the narrative. I mean, the mainstream media wants us fearful. Yesterday was the most hyped windstorm I have seen in my life. Did it do damage? Yeah. I mean, there was 55 reports of tornadic-like winds, mostly in rural areas, no major towns. And the only death was a truck driver that was told 2 days before you probably shouldn't be on Interstate 35. So the reality is that be careful for people hyping this. And you run around like chickens with your heads cut off for the next 3 months trying to cut costs. Because there's tools out here that you don't have to fall into that category. Illinois soybeans, it's not quite as good as corn, but it's a net farmer return of 133. So this year you're living probably one of the best years that you've ever seen. And I know maybe you had some wind damage and hail damage, or maybe you got into the tar spot, and it wasn't a perfect year, but it was a pretty damn good year. But look at next year. Average county yield, 60. Many years are better than that. So you ought to be thinking, are my yields trending with the county? That influences whether I should use margin protection or SEO or ECO and these products that are available to me to manage this revenue risk. Again, 11% increase, cost of production, non-land, Gary Schnitke. Cash rent, increase 7%. But if you have not negotiated your cash rent for 22, you better be careful. If Iowa land values are highly correlated with cash rents, and land values go up 29%, that's not good outlook for cash rents. Now, we're not going to go up in 22 by 29%, but we're probably going 10 or 12% higher in 1 year. So I thought, you know what I should do? I should interview farmers and say, what are you doing? So I've got a lot of central Iowa farmers. I go to church with some of them, and some of them even talk to me. You know, after you retire, you got a lot of time on your hands. You got to buy them lunch or coffee. So I said to 6 farmers, well-managed farms, I said, so how are you managing these risks? And they said, number one, Gordon, this plays right into your wheelhouse. You better make sure you know what it costs to produce the 21 crop. This is an actual farm in central Iowa. His actual break-even, he pulls all these numbers apart. He knows his 21 costs. He farms 13 different farms. He owns 7. He rents 6. All right. His actual break-even's about 405 on corn. And he's having a great year. His actual break-even for soybeans, on average, of these 13 farms, is $9.85. Now, Gordon, you shared with me some of your numbers, and they're not that far off, are they? A lot depends on the land costs and whether you own the land or you rent the land. And we use what we call cash rent equivalent that we put on all our break-evens. But Iowa State's not even going to release that data until January. And we're not going to know our cash rents until May. So nobody's going to know exactly what these costs are. Illinois is going to release their cost of production in January. Schnittke will be here, and you can talk about these. That's where I'd start. Rather than run off like a chicken with his head cut off and try to cut costs for 22, start with knowing what your actual costs are by farm, by crop, and maybe even by field. But then when I met with these 6 farmers, and these were during harvest, but we got rained out in October, so it was a great time to do these interviews. So I interviewed these farmers, and I all had the same set of questions, maybe like we'll do in the panel discussion here at 11:15. And I said, how are you managing this profit margin squeeze? And by the way, this will be in Farm Journal magazine in 2 weeks, because I just finished that interview yesterday with Farm Journal. And these farmers said, well, number one, we didn't fall off the turnip truck. All right. We accumulated our wealth by managing risk. So we've already booked or prepaid 22 crop inputs. We've got a lot of our 22 costs already booked. And then they tell the story. The co-op called me in July and said, hey, you want to pay $650 a ton for anhydrous? Is it going up? Oh, baby. That was the deal. That was the deal. Is many of you have already managed those costs. And I think that's key, because I believe fertilizer is the big swing. I don't think we're going to see necessarily higher seed costs, but we've got transportation costs associated with seed. I'd rank number 1 fertilizer, number 2 crop protection. 70% of the chemicals used in crop protection originate from what country? China. What happens if China shuts down here in about a month for the Olympics? You think supply chain bottlenecks are a problem. How about not manufacturing? That's why I think glyphosate, we're already hearing about that. We have got to figure out ways to manufacture these goods here. USA, USA. This is crazy, the dependence that we have on places like China that love us. So that adds to the uncertainty. And these 6 farmers said, we're going to focus on seed and crop protection, fertilizer and fuel, and most of our fuel costs are in the fall. So we booked our fuel in August, summer fills, for propane and fuel. We did all our tillage, and we didn't pay what the fuel would cost us today. You're writing your check, and you're buying ahead. Now, there's an article yesterday, it was an Ag Web, it was a good article. It said you can deduct 50% of your normal crop-related expenditures, but if you are audited by IRS, you better have a receipt that's specific for what you bought. You can't just pay the co-op $250,000. If you are in a full-blown audit, that $250,000 has to state what product you bought, what quantity, what the cost per unit was, and the total cost. I think fertilizer is a part of the problem, because a lot of the input suppliers can't quote you or make sure they can supply that. I don't think seed's an issue. but I see fertilizer, maybe crop protection. You better have a receipt. Prepay your expenses. And that's played out perfectly this fall. Where I could prepay expenses, I can deduct it from my income tax. I reduce my income tax liability. Number 3, the farmer said, you better tell them Illinois boys, you better work with reputable suppliers. You write a check to somebody that's out of business this winter, you're an unsecured creditor. Good luck collecting. More importantly, is you better make sure that that supplier has that fertilizer available, or that crop protection available, or that bag of seed corn matches that crop protection that we've got to use. This is probably not the year to see if we can find a fly-by-night to buy our inputs from, because they're cheaper. This is probably a year that we make sure we're in tune with the input suppliers of what they can provide. We might take delivery of seed early just because they say, hey, I can move that seed next week. But if we're taking liquid product, I think we've got to be careful. I hear that it can still freeze in central Illinois. Is that right? Because it was like Florida yesterday. So I think you've got to be on your game. When I look out into the spring, and I'm going to quote the American Farm Bureau, they released data Monday this week, and they said the cost of ammonia has gone up over 200% since the spring of 20. Is that and MAP and urea has gone up over 150%. I think you've got to make sure that if you're giving a quote that you can secure that product. I believe we're moving to more liquid nitrogen. And now propane costs have dropped with the natural gas cost. We might not feel it yet, but I think the lower natural gas costs are probably going to set us up. I think we can provide more of the nitrogen needs, but it's probably going to be geographical. We can't ship these up the Mississippi. We've got to be less dependent. In Iowa, we have major nitrogen manufacturing plants, and one's in southeast Iowa, and it's owned by Israel. Isn't it kind of funny how they figure out how to invest? And then we've got another major one up by Sioux City. So in Iowa, we don't count on the river to provide us much of anything in nitrogen. It's coming from these local plants, but then shipped by truck, we're going to pay more transportation. I think we're going to have to make sure we're working with reputable suppliers. My joke earlier this winter was, I think there's going to be more free meals this winter. You good? All right, so loosen your belt buckle, because I think these suppliers are going to want to get in front of you to talk about how they're managing these. I think a lot of the seed decisions are probably made, but then you're going to have to manage the crop protection that comes on the backside and work with reputable suppliers. These farmers said, you know, we had an open fall, and after the rains were over in October and we finished harvest, we got more time to soil test. And we're probably not going to increase our P&K. We're just going to make sure that we maintain those levels, because we know P and especially K are going up. And we've got a tremendous advantage in Iowa over Illinois. It's called animal shit. And we got a lot of it. And it's more valuable than it's ever been. And there's a lot of phosphorus and part of the nitrogen that comes with the animal waste. I go to Bible study with a hog farmer. He farms about 2,000 acres, and he's got 4 confinement units. And I said, Brad, how many loads of manure have you hauled? And he looked at his little black book, Gordon, and he says, as of today, 2 weeks ago, 159 loads. And it's been a great year to apply. It's been a great year. So I think maybe there's some advantages of that animal manure and animal waste and not paying commercial fertilizer costs and soil testing. The farmer said, you know, we're probably going to more split nitrogen application. It's not business as usual. We see anhydrous ammonia, but we've got those deep loam soils like you. All right, they're 10 feet deep. And so we see a lot of anhydrous ammonia in soybean stubble that you know's going back. But I noticed something a couple weeks ago. We've got more corn stalks torn up, and a lot of that anhydrous is sitting in corn stubble. We're going back to more corn in the rotation. Iowa will increase. We will have more corn. In 21, we had more beans than usual. But it was because of the windstorm of August 10th of 20 that damaged 5 million acres of corn, because some of that corn had to be destroyed, and we got into the issue of volunteer corn. So you'll see Iowa, you'll never catch Iowa corn production. You said, why is that? We plant 3.5 million more acres. You slackers. All right. So take Cook County and level that thing, all right? Plant that back like it should have been. Take care of the crime issue as well. So I think you're going to see Iowa likely go to more corn acres and go back to our normal corn, soybeans, or corn rotation. Number 4, reduce tillage. And boy, you could see this. I don't think we tilled more. I just think we got a chance to do more light tillage. And a lot of this isn't deep ripping. We didn't have compaction issues. We didn't have a wet spring. But we've got more moisture in our profile right now than we've had since April of 2020. You said, where'd it come from? 7 inches of rain the last week of October. We got 7 inches of rain on average. And a lot of these fields were harvested. And it's all sitting in the profile. Average percentage, topsoil moisture, Iowa, 84%. Subsoil, 69%. We just don't have the same threat. And I think some of you are in this same boat. I'm seeing targeted tillage and more vertical tillage than I've ever seen in my life. And I always hear, it's too expensive. Pays for itself in the long run. We index the seed, we index the nitrogen, we put on less fertilizer. A lot of this is banded. We put it on in the spring. So we've already managed those costs. And then this is what I taught for 20 years plus at Iowa State, and why I probably retired early. It's called cash rent negotiations. It's why I don't work for Hertz or Farmers National or Peoples. I don't like this area, but I taught it for 20 years, and I'm the biggest proponent of flexible cash leases. We should have gone here in 13. We should have gone here in 20. I'm a big proponent of flexible cash leases with a base, and I like to use net. And so if a farmer, tenant operator has a good year, they pay a bonus. But these farmers, 4 of the 6, said, you know, we've got flex leases, but we don't have flex leases on all of our acres. And you know, we paid out some 50. I had a farmer at a meeting a couple weeks ago. I paid an $80 bonus. But my cash rents aren't going up for 22. So he said, well, I don't have one of those. You know, where were you at, 20 years ago teaching these? Think through this. Why don't you create your own bonus? You're concerned about cash rents going up for 22, and you know your landlord's been hearing all this issue of cash rents. Why don't you add a bonus on to the 21 cash rent? So let me role play, okay? You go over to the landlord's house, and you make the cash rent payment. And you make sure you catch your cash rent landlords before they leave for Florida or Texas or Arizona. And you say, yeah, I've got that second half cash rent payment, and I added an extra $20 an acre. What? Yeah, I added an extra $20 an acre. I had a good year. We had good prices, and yields weren't too bad. And I'm concerned about cash rents going up for 22, and I just want to let you know, when I have good years like this, I'm just going to add a little bit more cash rent. What will that cash rent landlord say? No, I don't want to take it. No, I can't take your money. See, your landlords have seen in your machine sheds. You ought to probably shut those doors. They know. They know that net farm income, second or third highest in 21 in history. They know you had a good year. They can look out and see the pickup truck you're driving. It's not paid for, but you're driving a new pickup truck. This is a way to manage risk. And 4 of these 6 farmers said that is not that bad of an idea. Now in Iowa, we have a September 1st date. You don't have the same September 1st date, okay? So we've got to be on our game a little earlier than that. But start negotiating now if you've not negotiated cash rents, and figure out a way of how a flex cash lease would work, and pay extra rent on the good years. Because when you pay extra rent for 22, good luck, God bless. That could be the challenge. And Snitke's only using 7% increase in cash rents. I think he's way too low. Average cash rents, Illinois, 22. And then this is my wheelhouse, and this is why I have job security in retirement. It's because the ability to pre-harvest market your 22 crops. Now, Gordon, I won't mention your name, but I will relay this, is that if you'd have sold your 21 crops this time of year, it's too early. The market peaked in May. And for those of you that have been following me, you say, well, I got to wait till spring. I believe this is the year, the 22 crop. I think we've got to start our sales earlier. I think we've got to start our sales earlier, especially soybeans. If you have not priced any 22 crop soybeans, I think you've got to get back on that horse. I'm just concerned that we could set these soybean prices back. Maybe it doesn't happen until February or March, but I just want to make sure we're managing the risk. And then what I'm teaching all winter long, in exotic places like Phoenix, finally figured out how to get to Phoenix in the winter and get paid for it, is I teach crop insurance shallow loss products. And it's the highlight of my message today. It's the highlight of my message. And I'm 2.5 months early. And most of you probably aren't even thinking about this till we get to March. And so hang on. Is because I think really the key to my message today isn't just volatility and uncertainty and geopolitical risk and supply chain bottlenecks that no one knows the answer to. Now, I've got some solutions to all of the above. And I think the place that we start is understanding how pre-harvest marketing works. And most of you got this down. You know, you've got a PhD in pre-harvest marketing. You know the game. You know, you're probably using forward contracts or HTAs, and those are what I call of your delivery bushels. And then if you don't want to deliver the bushels, you've got a broker, and you can use hedges or you can use put options. So when I interviewed these 6 farmers, I said, okay, help me teach 5,000 farmers this winter of how pre-harvest marketing works with crop insurance. So as they dialogued with me, I come up with these graphics, and then I've got a great graphic designer that helps me put these together. So the example today is going to be an 80% revenue protection. It's a multi-peril product. You're already using it. You've been using it for 20 years. It's going to use your farm level APHs. So to start with is you understand the basics of multi-peril crop insurance. And you said, well, why don't you use an 85%? I could. By crop, by county. I could go to 85%. But remember how the subsidies work. When I go from 80% to 85%, and especially if I move from enterprise back to optional units, I get into this premium uncertainty. But Uncle Sugar loves you. You remember the one that's 29 trillion in the hole? They love you. And they're going to pay crop insurance subsidies, probably for the rest of your life. Amen? Amen. And so you've got to start interacting with the crop insurance piece. But I think the greatest advantage of revenue protection and how it works is that ability to pre-harvest market. Is not waiting until harvest of 22. Say, oh, I probably ought to sell something. Now, I've got some farmers that do that, but it's more of habit than it is of understanding truly crop revenue risk. They use revenue protection, and this example was 80%, but I am only so I can tie on the SCO and the ECO piece, okay? Is they tend to pre-harvest market, and this is true of 50% of Iowa farmers, they tend to pre-harvest market somewhere between 50 and 70% of their APH bushels. And they don't even blink. And when the hail and the thunderstorms come in June or December, actually not much crop insurance risk of 70-mile-an-hour winds in December, they understand how these work. But separate delivery of those bushels to your ethanol plant, to the soybean crusher, to the river. Those are delivery, either forward cash or HTAs. So the new farmers over here, am I catching you up? You missed the first 10 years, but you're right back there again. Those are called delivery bushels because crop insurance underlies those bushels. The way crop insurance works, revenue protection, I'm guaranteed bushels and I'm guaranteed price. But then as I see the sophistication of a lot of these farmers, they haven't totally left this idea. It is, you know, once I get past June, I've got a futures price risk, but I don't want to commit delivery. I'll hedge those bushels. I'll contact my broker. I've already got a hedge account. I've got maintenance money that's sitting in there. I'll go ahead and hedge maybe another 10 or 15%. There's nothing magic about percentage. This just happened to be the farmers I interviewed. They like to deliver bushels to ethanol plants, corn, and then soybean crushers, beans. And again, we're not as dependent upon exports as you would be. And then that hedge, that's probably sitting out there in the spring. You with me? It's probably hedging in the spring. Because if you hedge too early, you can get margin calls, and then you've got to manage that risk of higher futures price. So they understand how hedging works. And they also use put options. And, you know, they don't necessarily listen to Mark Gold, just buy all puts, because they understand there's time value. And so if they can wait to buy those puts maybe in the late spring months, the puts aren't as expensive. And so the idea is that maybe you might be pricing 100% of your bushels that you're going to produce, but you're only delivering 50 to 70%. But underlying that is crop insurance. And then look at those acronyms in the top because that's where we're going. What deductible are you willing to accept? Oh, I don't know. What's it going to cost me? Well, you tell me. Do you want to use the shallow loss products on top of your revenue protection? Well, I don't know. What's it going to cost me? Well, let's pay attention. And I'll show you how these shallow loss products, these add-ons, can be added on to your multi-peril and revenue protection policies. Because to me, that's really the risk. Because those shallow loss products, that SCO, that ECO, that MP, all right, that is the loss that we tend to not collect on. Because we've just committed to use moldy peril, revenue protection, and that's all we use. So we probably ought to set some goals. So I asked the farmers, and by the way, many of you know I've used this Marty merchandiser, so these are Marty's numbers. And Marty and I have known each other for over 20 years. Marty's an actual farmer, but that's not his name. You'll never find him in the white pages. And he's involved in a farming operation. Next generation's coming. He's got a brother, a nephew that farm, and they share machinery and equipment. And so I just shared with Marty, all right, I pulled out the monthly charts, and I said, where will likely be the resistance for the nearby corn futures? And this sets us up for 22, folks, as well as the old crop bushels. I do not see the nearby corn futures contracts going over 650. We're going to struggle at 6. It's going to take a drought in South America to think that the nearby March or May or July are going to spend much time over 6. But on the charts, I can see a resistance area there. But corn's not going to sell off. These are monthly futures prices. I don't see corn spending much time at all below 440. Remember when that used to be the high price? Now it's the low price. Is this cool? This is cool. Where will you be selling the 22 crop? I believe that if you can focus on selling 22 December corn at 550 or above, you're going to make a lot of money. You're going to make a lot of money. You said, where are we at today? 546, 547, close enough for government work, federal government, not state government, is we're there. The high's 568. We were there in around that May 7th date. I personally believe that we're within probably 5, maybe 10% of our highs, and I'm not saying run out and do it today, but I think you've got basically 6 months to get her done and not sit on our hands and try to outguess the weather, outguess USDA reports, outguess where these futures prices are going. I would want to set an objective, all right, to get something done. I was reviewing Matt Bennett's work this week. Matt will be on this program, all right, later this winter. And Matt released a number this week, is how much, what percent of new crop corn, 22 corn, should you have priced? Matt said Monday, 20%. You should have at least 20% of your new crop December 22, or you can use March, depends on your storage. You should have it priced. I'm working with market analysts that are at 30%. I'm working with market analysts that are already at 30% because we've already hit our price objective. This is the year to use price and not necessarily time. Because if you use time and you say, I'm going to bet the whole farm on April, May, June, what happens if Russia goes to the Ukraine? They've only got 90,000 soldiers lined up, and the Ukraine's lining up soldiers. And now we're talking about a missile defense system for Europe. It's 1978 all over again. Hello? Oh, Russia, they wouldn't do that. And then yesterday on the radio, I hear there's going to be one political figure show up for the Winter Olympics. Putin. Putin will be there. He's competing in the bobsleds, what I heard. That's a joke. That's a joke! That's a joke! Is you've got to manage the geopolitical issues that are playing out in the background. You've got to manage risks that you've probably not thought about for 40 years. When I look at soybeans, and I'm doing the same thing, and I'm interviewing farmers, and I'm talking to Marty, and I know Marty knows his break-evens, and he's got really well-managed farms. the potential for nearby beans, likely with a drought, probably in Argentina and Uruguay and Paraguay, maybe 1350. And I'm not changing these numbers in 4 weeks. It's not something you change these numbers. You said something different. No, I didn't. When I look at the charts and I say, well, where likely will be that resistance, but I think it will take weather to get us there. And if weather becomes an event, my opinion, it's going to occur in the next 6 weeks, not the next 6 months, like corn. We're probably going to be more dependent upon South America weather, where they produce 55% of the world's soybean crop. But I'm not in USDA's camp. I just don't see soybeans spending a lot of time below 1080. So no PLC. Ark County is your government farm program, unless you take SCO. FSA's calling us, Ark County, sign them all. All FSA farm numbers, all crops, Ark County. Where should you be doing pricing? I'm using 1250. Matt Bennett is using 50% of your 22 beans are already priced. Most all the market analysts that I listen to have moved quickly from 20 to 30 or 40% in the last 2 weeks. They've moved very quickly. And I don't know that you're going to get 1250 now. But boy, you sure could have, especially over the last 6 or 7 weeks. I think when you're given these gifts, you take them. And you do it on the crop insurance and the delivery bushels. Because what we start to understand for the 22 crop is, how do the government farm programs interact with crop insurance? And they involve the federal government, and we know they're flush with cash. I heard the printing presses are going to slow down just a little bit. And so here's an image I've been using since probably the 8 Farm Bill, to be quite honest. So if you're counting on the federal government to bail you out, you can always take your grain under loan. It's called a marketing assistance loan. And if nobody will loan you any money, FSA will, but you have to harvest the crop and have a warehouse receipt, or have the grain bins measured. But the national loan rate, which changed in the 18 Farm Bill, that used to be 5, and now it's 6.20. And corn used to be $1.95, and now it's $2.20. It varies by county. So if nobody else will loan you money, FSA will loan you money. But when I was in Columbus, Nebraska a couple weeks ago, they got a problem with FSA. Really? What's their problem? Vaccine mandates. 2 of the 3 girls in the office are out of here. They basically flipped off the federal government and said, we don't need this job. We'll go to work. We'll go to work for Farm Credit Illinois or Farm Credit Services of America or Farmers National. We don't need the grief. Think through that. So if you're looking for a part-time job this winter, you might check with FSA, but you make sure you're vaccinated about 3 times, or you won't have a federal job. So when I look at this, then I look at what other programs is FSA providing. Well, they're providing me this ARC PLC program. This is not the program I'm counting on. ARC PLC payments in Illinois for 21 will be 0. Why? The prices were never low enough. And when you have good county yields, you don't trigger ARC County. You say, so where's the game? Where should I focus this idea of managing crop revenue risk? Crop insurance is the game. It's the big tarp. Look at that. It's the big net, safety net. It's not the marketing assistance loan. It's not ARC PLC. It's crop insurance. And we know how that product works, but we've got to make a decision, and we work with our crop insurance agent. And what's the deadline? March 15th. I call crop insurance March Madness, and it has nothing to do with Illini basketball. And I hope you're there. We're number 11 this week, 10-0. I hope you're there. But to get prepared for March Madness, you've got to get your head around how these products work and how they interact. So let's throw another safety net into this canyon, and we call them shallow loss products. And for the crop insurance specialists that are here, you're welcome, because that's exactly what you need on the 16th day of December. Is I need to know, how do these products work? Well, they are add-ons, and they're county-based. They're not based on your farm's yields. And these aren't GRIP. One of them kind of works like GRIP, just a little bit, but you're not dumping moldy peril and revenue protection. You're adding on some safety nets. So I got a caffeine buzz on there in September, and I said, you know, this is kind of hard to explain. You got the SCO, and you got the ECO, and you got the margin protection. How do these work? So I came up with a visual. This will be in Farm Journal in February. Pretend that you're thinking, in this example today, corn. I'm trying to insure all my corn acres, all farms in all counties. This is a pond. Most of those corn acres, you're going to fill that pond with revenue protection. That is the most important decision that you're making. Don't think it's shallow loss. You want to fill the pond with revenue protection. 65, 70, 75, 80, 85% level of coverage. And you're making those decisions by crop, by county. And if you're in optional units, you're still insuring at the section lines, but it's more expensive. If you go to enterprise units, you're insuring at the county line. But watch how we can add on additional coverage where the government pays 44 to 65% of our premium. Here we go, all right? I could add on SCO. How's that sucker work? Well, SCO covers 86% of a county-based revenue. So it's using county yields, and it's using the same price projected in harvest price as does revenue protection. You said, well, why would I want to add on SCO for 22? Well, if you're at 80% coverage level, then you could add on SCO, and you would have county-based coverage on top. Shallow. Get the shallow? See the pond? See the shallow? That's where the losses tend to occur. But it's not your farm's yields, it's the county yields. It works a lot like an area-based plan, but you're putting them on top of that revenue protection product. But if you buy SCO, you cannot take Ark County. What? You can't take Ark County. And so if you are buying SCO, you can't take Ark County. If you're not buying SCO, take Ark County and get to the FSA office before January 4th and the max vaccine mandate. Just kidding. See, the FSA offices are not in good spots. All right. And they probably don't have a lot going right now, to be quite honest. You know, there's probably some direct loans, and that, you know, maybe some grain bin loans, or for young and beginnings, it'd be a great time to lock in some 2% money, you know, through FSA. But the reality is, if you take SCO, supplemental coverage option, you can't take Ark County. You could buy ECO at the 90 or 95% trigger level. This was new in 21. Do you see the supplemental income for the retirement guy now. They come up with a new product and I retire. That's cool. Good timing. You could buy ECO and you don't have to buy SCO. So you could still be in Ark County. It's a county-based product. It's an add-on. It uses county yields. And the trigger could be at the 90% level or the 95% level, so you're going to pay more for the 95 than the 90. Oh, it gets better than that. There's another shallow loss product that was created in 2015 at Iowa State University. You've heard of it. It's my boss. My boss came up with this idea, got it piloted in 16 and came live in 17. It's called margin protection. But if you take margin protection, you had to make that decision by September 30th. And you can't buy SCO or ECO, but you can still be in Ark County. And it's got some moving parts. It's got a price level of 80 to 120%, kind of like the old GRIP policy. But these three shallow loss products are all add-ons. The margin protection required that decision by September 30th because it uses a price discovery period of mid-August to mid-September. So if you did not buy margin protection on or before September 30th of 21 for the 22 crop, you're out. You're out. But you can still buy SCO or you could still buy ECO. What's the deadline? March 15th. So this is telling you that maybe a part of this fielding forward, I probably ought to dig into how crop insurance is working and how I can still add shallow loss products. Or maybe I just go to 85%. That's where I was last year. But we're going to pay more for crop insurance in 22. Why? Higher prices. The price alone will make crop insurance premiums higher. And that crop insurance premium is determined by projected price and price volatility. So I'm stepping back from shallow loss. I'm making sure you're grounded. You know how crop insurance works? Is you turn in your yields by crop, by farm, every year to my crop insurance agent. That goes into my actual production history database. It's an RMA database. And my crop insurance agent can then provide what will be my APH. But because of the work of Bruce Sherrick at the University of Illinois, we got trend-adjusted APH. So we call this approved. And this is Marty's farm. Marty has 189 bushel an acre APH on his corn fields in the 2 counties he farms in. His approved APH that he can use for 22 is 204. Stick with me. His county yield's 203. His approved APH is 204. Stick with me. This is how crop insurance has worked for 21 years and how it will work probably the rest of your life. We multiply the level of coverage times the projected price, the simple average of December corn futures in the month of February 22, and I'm going to use 550 for my example today. So what is the revenue guarantee for corn? It's $8.97. Marty's cost of production, I think you saw earlier, was around $8.60. So his revenue guarantee, he feels comfortable going to 80%, where he's been at 85. He's been at 85. But he can look at using SCO or ECO, or he could have used margin protection. So his deductible, again, is the 20%. And here's why revenue protection works so well with PreHarvest Marketing. It guarantees me bushels and it guarantees me price. So I separate my delivery from my non-delivery bushels, because I can use order cash contracts or HTAs for delivery. And if I don't deliver the bushels, I can still use hedging. And I can use put options. Don't take the harvest price off. Leave the harvest price on. Because the way revenue protection works, it's the higher of the spring or harvest price, February or October. This is this importance of understanding this interaction. And again, if you're farming river bottom, be careful. There's a basis risk, but more important, prevent plant. And as long as you're not taking prevent plant, you're okay. So as I pick up speed and I look at these decisions, and I say, well, all those things on the left side are things that I've been doing. And we added one last year. That was that quality loss option. And sure, I'm going to take that. But watch what happens on the right-hand side. Here come the add-ons. Here come the add-ons. They're county-based endorsements. I'm adding them on to multi-peril. And the government's paying 44 to 65%, 65 on SCO and ECO, and 44% on margin protection, depending on level of coverage. And I'm looking at this and I go, oh my gosh, we just got 2.5 months and it's March Madness, and we've got to get my head around this. And I got to get with my crop insurance agent, or we got to get this crazy guy in from Iowa State. Maybe he can explain this better than my crop insurance agent can. Well, there's a tool that's out there, but it's basically this whole understanding of how crop insurance projected prices month of February, and I think you're going to see that in a little bit too. I saw the panel discussions are going to have that. But also the revenue margin protection. Here comes the new kid in town. What about margin protection? I can make those decisions earlier. And what about the harvest prices? This year, the harvest price was higher than the projected price. That's why we didn't likely collect anything unless we had wind or hail as an endorsement. In the same way with soybeans. Here's 12 years of data. But look what's going on with margin protection. When we have these high prices, we've got a new kid. And we better think about the new kid. We better think about margin protection and how it works. And then we understand that, yeah, that harvest price multiplied times the actual production. So there is a new product that's out there. That's all I'm going to say. It's a spreadsheet. Not everybody has it. Some AIPs have it. Some don't have it. And it's pretty powerful. And so what I was able to do, I'm working with Omaha. And that's not Peyton Manning's call it the line of scrimmage, all right? I worked with them because I'm doing 8 programs for them, and they shared with me how this product called Optimum works. And this is a decision-making tool. It downloads all of the data. So we downloaded Marty's APH. We used the 204 bushel an acre approved yield for the 22 corn crop. And we downloaded his county yields, and that's 203 trend yield. And then we're going to plug some numbers in. I'm going to use 550 corn. I'm saying that's the projected price in the month of February. And the margin protection was 506. Cost of production was assumed to be about 900, but margin protection only uses a portion of that. It was about 397. Now here's what's cool. Follow this. Stay awake. Follow this. If Marty just took revenue protection at the 80% level, okay? His premium's not that much. Wind and green snap, the endorsements aren't on top of this. He's in enterprise units. His premium would be about $12, all right? And the government's paying around 70% of his premium. But look what happens when we add the shallow loss products. Here comes SCO, March 15th. Can't take our county, but I can still take PLC. Both of them probably aren't going to pay. It's going to cost me another $20. Shallow, I'm at the top of the pond. That's where the losses typically occur. What if I added ECO? It's a 95% trigger. Could have used 90 or 95. Uses 100% of the price level. I can add that on. That's going to cost me an extra $50. Oh, I don't have $50. I'm just cutting corners. I spent last 2.5 months. Chicken with their head cut off. Oh, I can't spend any more money. It's revenue. Fertilizer doesn't guarantee revenue. Seed doesn't guarantee revenue. These products are guaranteeing revenue, but they're using county-based yields. Look at the new kid in town, margin protection. Oh, that's expensive. That's why I didn't buy it last fall. Way too expensive. I can't spend that kind of money in 22. All right? Again, this is the Cadillac 95-120. And you see the premium. You see the premium. Now, what if I took those same products, those same 4 products, and I pretended that we had good yields in 22? And sure enough, we got an ENSO neutral summer. And corn prices went down. And the harvest price in October went to $4.50. It's at $4.40 on my monthly chart. And the marketing year average price went to $4.80. That was under my hat. That won't trigger a PLC, and it might not trigger an ARC County. What would I collect if I had trend yields of 204 farm and 203 county? Revenue protection doesn't trigger. But look at the shallow loss products with $4.50 harvest price. Woo! The shallow loss products, the top of the pond, start triggering these losses, even though there's not a county yield loss. So there's no ARC County payments, but we start triggering coverage of SEO and ECO at the 95 trigger, margin protection at the 95-120. What if yields start to fall? Now here's the problem with the shallow loss products. We don't know the final county yields till mid-June of 23. That's when RMA releases their yields. But if yields start to fall and price is $4.50, you can see what type of indemnity claims come. They don't get them. Revenue protection you get right after harvest when you turn in your production. But the shallow loss you don't collect until the following June when the final county yields are known. So you've got to make sure you understand that I want revenue protection, but I could have added these on. And then there's another tool that's out here, all right? It's called Agent E-Advantage, proprietary software. Not everybody has this, where you can actually run the same numbers, and it looks at what would be the best program, ARC County, PLC, or a shallow loss product. And in Marty's case, with normal yields and $4.50 corn, PLC doesn't pay, ARC County doesn't pay, but the shallow loss product of SEO does. It picks up that loss at the 86% of the county level. But revenue protection never triggered. The shallow loss product triggered. In essence, I believe the shallow loss products are the more important decisions than our ARC PLC. ARC PLC is just gymnastics. You're just going to do a jumping jack for the FSA office. What's the deadline? March 15th, but they'd like to see you next week. So unless you're going to buy SEO, sign up for ARC County. Unless you're going to buy SEO, sign up for ARC County. But if you take margin protection, you can't buy SEO, and you can't buy ECO. So, in summary, the best 2 websites, Iowa State, Illinois. Rock stars. Rock stars. It's where we've clustered some of the best ag economists in the land-grant university systems. And you saw me use a lot of the farm doc data and Schnittke data. If you're looking for marketing year average price, that's that ARC PLC piece to accumulate that at Kansas State. If you want to know where the baseline projections, these will not change until approximately February 23rd when the USDA Ag Outlook Conference occurs. There's where you find the baselines. And if you want an update for what is Columbia University saying about La Nina, El Nino, and ENSO, you can go here after the 19th of every month. With that, I'm done. I'm looking forward to this. This should be fun. We call this Stump the Chump. Is any questions that you have, this group is ready for. I'll tell you. You guys go ahead. You've got introduction. We're going to use PowerPoint slides. I think this is in your handout. So let's kind of do an overview. You introduce yourselves, and you know I'm, again, at a lower level, so I'm a serf. You are the lords of knowledge. The lords of knowledge. Go ahead.
I'm Glenn Simple, and I'm a lender in the commercial lending department. Been with Farm Credit for 39 years, and I'm here to talk about interest rates and some of the ag export issues.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Jack Young. I work in the Decatur Regional Branch office as a Vice President of Crop Insurance, and I've been with Farm Credit for 17 years.
Steve Niemeyer. I'm a real estate appraiser with Farm Credit. Been here about 10 years, work mostly out of the Taylorville office and talk about land values.
And I'm Kent Reed, the Chief Appraiser for Farm Credit Illinois. Been with Farm Credit about 14 years.
So how many of you want to pay higher interest next year? Raise your hands. Go on, go on. Guess what? The Federal Reserve does not care what you want to do or what you don't want to do. You're going to pay more interest next year. The Fed met this week and kind of caught up with what the market was predicting. There'll be probably 3 Fed rate increases next year is what both the market and also the Federal Reserve Board members' predictions or projections yesterday that were released. Probably be another 3 to 4 in 2023. And long range, they say going to get to about 2.5 to 3% on what they call the terminal Fed funds rate. So what's that mean for you? You know, your rates will go up on your operating credits as the Federal Reserve raises the Fed funds rate. So first one's going to be, you know, earliest would probably be March, more likely around May. And then there'll be one late summer, and then they'll give you a Christmas present next year, probably in December, with another Fed rate increase. So interest rates are headed back up. They'll be, you know, somewhat similar to what we saw in the 2017 to 2018 rate increase environment. So a couple of other things that I just want to mention. Ag exports, and I work with some specialty crop handlers that export overseas, and the biggest issue that I think we have as a U.S. ag producer right now is we have what I call a customer concentration issue. 55% of our soybean exports last year went to one customer. Well, it's China. And if you're plugged into the news, well, you know, our relationship with China and Russia are not great. And, you know, not trying to give anybody any anxiety, but if there's going to be something happen there on either the Russia front or the Chinese front, they'll probably wait until after the Olympics because they don't want to, you know, mess up the punch bowl of the Olympics that are going to be in China in February. So I think there's some risks for us on the ag export side after the Olympics wrap up. So other than that, the only other thing I have is that if you want to kind of follow the interest rate market a little closer, the CME has what they call the FedWatch tool. And literally, these are people that are putting money to work just like they do with futures markets in corn and soybeans. There's a futures market in Fed funds. And that's where you can get your real-time information about what the market participants are expecting as far as the Federal Reserve, the Fed funds rate is. With that, I'll stop.
Okay, I'm going to talk for a few minutes here about crop insurance, and I can't sit still, so I got to stand up and walk around. But as Dr. Johnson alluded to, it's going to be a huge decision for our operations to manage our risk this year with crop insurance. Why? $5.50 for a spring price potentially today if we look at December corn futures for that average month. That's small print, but look at that print from where we've been historically. We were 458 last year. What does that mean for our guarantees? If you take a farm with a 215 average and you purchase 85% coverage last year and you had 458 for a spring price, our revenue guarantee was 837. If you add 550 into that for this year, we could be well over $900. Unbelievable. Able to protect potentially profitable levels with our crop insurance. Now, look at the last few years. 388 was our spring starting price in 2020. Date that all the way back to 2015. 415 was the high. That's a trading range that we had for our crop insurance. When you looked at crop insurance, what did you think? I got to have it, but it doesn't provide that flash. So, with that being said, if we go look at soybeans, Dr. Johnson, next slide, please. Last year we were 1187. We talked earlier that we're currently trading at 1245. I realize we got to get to February, but we got to start planning now. You saw the options. You saw the opportunity that we have with our crop insurance that we haven't had for years. Look at the history there. 2015, again, 973, all the way up to 2020, we were in a range of 885 to 1019. Doesn't create a lot of energy towards our crop insurance. So, with that being said, we're going to have some potential levels of crop insurance that we haven't had for quite some time this year. Our market volatility, remember Dr. Johnson talked about what sets your premium. Of course, more coverage creates more premium. Market volatility also does that. And what is market volatility? In easy terms for you and I to understand, the likelihood of the price to change from spring to fall. The more the likelihood of that thing changing, the higher the volatility. Higher volatility is a good thing, except for it makes our premiums a little bit higher than what we normally are used to expecting. But we're insuring a Cadillac, right? Over $900 potentially in that scenario I gave you a second ago. So those are some things that we can dive in with questions later. What I'm also going to encourage you to do, as Dr. Johnson alluded to, get with your crop insurance agent sooner versus later. We talked the March 15th deadline, but I think there's a lot of things that we need to work through. I think you need to come prepared to your meetings. I know we've done a lot of meetings where we kind of get there, we talk the options, but I want to know what your break even is this year. I want to know what you're trying to accomplish with your crop insurance. Do you need a base coverage, and then do you need a little more coverage? Did you have added risk in your operation? Those are the questions that we really need to hamper on, because there is a lot of risk at us this year. Who hasn't heard of the higher input prices? Who hasn't heard of the higher lack of availability of products? So those are things that I think that we need to look at. We need to really be ready to study. I'll welcome questions when we get to the next segment, but thank you for your time so far.
I can't sit still either, so I'm going to give you kind of an overview that, and understand that this is probably more of an 18-month picture that we're going to paint here. As you can tell, what we do in our appraisal department is, if we've got 20 benchmark farms located through our 60 counties, and we reappraise those every year. Now, unfortunately, with the way this market has kind of moved, we value those farms on July 1st every year. So those 20 farms we value every year on July 1st. Now, you might have noticed here lately there's been a lot of activity. So that's why I'm saying this is really probably an 18-month picture. So you can tell there, what we've done here is each one of those benchmarks is on there. You'll see the blue line on top. That's what we call our cropland A farms. Again, just based upon U of I productivity levels. The red line there is what we would consider our B farms. And then we divide our C farms into north and south. So that green line there is the north C farms, and then the purple or blue or whatever that is down there. I'm colorblind, so I can't tell you. Is the Sea Farm South, which basically you could look at Interstate 70, anything south of there. Now, some of these benchmarks go all the way back to 1974. Here's 3 of them right here. And you can tell, you know, if you look back in 1974, you could have bought an A farm for about $2 grand. Anybody want one of them today? But you can see the 80s, and then you can see what happened in the early 2000s, and then you can see, obviously, the big peak. We reached in Illinois, we reached our peak in 2014. Some say 2013, but our study showed 2014. And then you can see 14, after 14, 15, 16, 17, we kind of mellowed out a little bit. Overall, that was probably a 15% drop. And then you can see here where we've come back up the last couple of years. And you can tell just looking at the red line there, we've not quite got in July to where we were in the record highs of 14. Again, you can kind of see that on that chart too. Here were our overall benchmark results from July of this year. And you can see individually, obviously, it's very location specific. We had farms that were up just barely to farms that were up over 20%. But on average, we were up 8.5%. So then the fall hit. And that picture is probably hard to tell, but this was one of my appraisers in our Muhammad office. On his board, he had all the auctions for just his 4 or 5 counties. And you can see each one of those is an auction. And all the activity that has happened in late October, November, and then early December. So this is where it gets interesting. So you can see here from this chart, this is all the auction sales in our territory from January of 2020 through the end of, well, 2 days ago when I put this presentation together. You notice anything there on that far side, all of those sales? You can see very little activity, very little, and then you can see the trend line of what the values have done, which is just skyrocketed. So that's kind of where we are with land values right now. We'll kind of leave it there, and I'll open it up when you want to have questions. But I would say if you looked at our benchmark study in July to where we are today, we're probably, and I'll let Steve comment on this too, probably up 20% or more from July, you think?
Yeah, I was just thinking, I believe I do a benchmark farm on the Morgan Sangamon line. It's probably one of our best ones. I think it was at 14 last July. It's probably close to 17 today. I mean, you know, for a really, really good farm in Sangamon County, you know, I think that's the price you'd be looking at for that type of farm.
So you're asking me to tell you where to go? Is that what you said? Is that right?
No. Where does land values go from here? I have a feeling that may be one of your questions.
Oh, okay. Well, they'll tell me where to go. I think I'll be canceled after today. Well, with that, we're going to open it up, all right, for the panel. So questions that you might have. This is a great opportunity, all right, for you to say, you know what, I was always kind of wondering about this. You know, as I step back, and I did a radio interview between my message and the panel discussion, there's just more uncertainty than I think we ever want to admit. And it's beyond inflation and supply chain. I mean, there is just a lot of things coming at us. So I look at this 22 and say, we heard about interest rates. I'm kind of concerned we're going to see crop insurance premiums go up. Higher prices, likely higher volatility. And do we change our levels of coverage? And we didn't hear about the shallow loss products. How does this SCO fit with these revenue protection levels of coverage? So go ahead. What about crop insurance? Do we change our approach to revenue protection?
Well, I think that that's the starting question for every operation. Where have you been? Why have you done what you've done? And then are there other opportunities to complement what you've done in the past and how that works? But with that being said, we talked a lot about different options today. And on paper, they may look like they fit your operation, but that's where your agent, your professional here at your professional crop insurance provider here at Farm Credit can sit down with you and help you look at those different options. And it may be an option that's different than what you've been comfortable with in the past. Maybe you've been an 85% coverage level. And as Dr. Johnson alluded to, maybe it's something where you drop down to 80%, but then you add a shallow coverage like an ECO on top, and you leave a band in between your 80% and your higher coverage level. So your ECO would allow you to leave that 80 to 85% band open, but then knowing that you're covered up to 90 or 95 on a county level. But there's things to address within that as well. It sounds good and it's good coverage. But I was talking with one of our participants here today at the break, and they live in a county where there's a pretty good divide in that county. And what I mean by that is the south half of that county isn't as productive in fertile soils as the north half. And it may not be a product that works well for a grower or an operation in the south half because your potential isn't near as good as what that is in the north half, and looking at that coverage from a county basis. So again, I think that the real message is get in with your crop insurance provider earlier than you ever have. Be prepared to have a productive meeting and look through those options.
Along those same lines, describe FSA, because the Farm Service Agency office staff is not going to know how crop insurance and these shallow loss products work.
Yeah, that's a great question. And one of the things that we take a lot of pride at Farm Credit in doing is understanding those FSA programs. And, it can get pretty watered down with all of the different acronyms. I mean, how many do we hear today? I imagine we could get to a dozen, right?
Oh, no, that's just the start. There's people here that still don't know what LDP stood for.
And I think the FSA office, they don't have control of it, correct? I mean, they're getting controlled by somebody up above them, but it's going to be harder and harder. The days of just walking in and getting your business done or talking to them are getting slimmer and slimmer. And now you got to make an appointment, you got to do this and that, or they want you to do it online. And they don't have comfort in those programs. Most of those individuals don't have comfort in talking with those. So talking about the PLC and the ARC, and I agree with Dr. Johnson. I think PLC is a moot point unless you want the SCO coverage. If you want the SCO coverage, you got to have PLC. However, your professionals at Farm Credit, they know these programs. They can help you walk through the scenarios. That evaluator that Dr. Johnson showed at the end of his presentation, we've got access to that. We can throw numbers in, we can throw scenarios in that work with your operation. I don't want to talk about your neighbor and what your neighbor's doing as a generality question. It doesn't matter. Their operation's different than yours. Let's talk about what works best for you and what your risk management strategy is for this coming year.
All right. Question for Glenn. Did I hear you say 39 years? 39 years that you've not heard about this retirement program that's out there? No? Okay, just checking.
I get there a day at a time.
All right, I've been there. I went early. What about inflation? Does this period of time, especially the last 6 to 8 months, remind you of any other times that you've experienced?
Well, they say history never repeats itself, but it rhymes. And I don't know, how many of you guys paid 13 or 14% interest? Hey, there's a lot more people with gray hair out there than I thought. It was a special time of which we thought we would never repeat, and I don't think we will, but it was painful, wasn't it? It's extremely painful. Now, I'm not predicting rates are going to go back up that high. The issue is a 3 or 4% increase in your interest cost, quite frankly, is probably going to be as painful as it was when it went from 7 or 8% to 13 or 14%, because we have so much more debt in these operations today, and you're not the most heavily leveraged. The federal government owes about $30 trillion. It's going to be extremely painful, and guess what? Every one of you get an opportunity to share in that pain as a taxpayer.
And our kids and grandkids. Yeah, don't forget about the kids and grandkids.
Absolutely. We are a debt-addicted society. Now, fortunately, if you've got farm real estate loans or equipment loans, the good thing is today we have adjustable and fixed rate products, so you can take some of that interest rate risk off of the table. Can't really take it off the table on the operating loan side. It rarely makes sense to have a fixed rate operating loan. It might, but I've just not seen that in my tenure where it made a lot of sense because of the fact that you have, you know, a zero balance for part of the year, and then you borrow and repay throughout the year. But yes, inflation was very high when I first started, and I say right now we're really kind of benefiting from a 35, almost 40-year fight to bring inflation under control, and the perception is that we beat inflation and that it wasn't going to return. So right now, the marketplace really thinks that this inflation spike is temporary. Probably is in some respects, but I do not believe we're going back to the days of, 1.5 to 2% inflation. We're probably going to have a little bit higher inflation going forward. Part of that's demographics. People like Dr. Johnson are retiring and leaving the workforce, and there are not as many people entering the workforce as there are people that are exiting the workforce. So you're going to have lesser productivity, and the average economy growth is going to be more muted than it was 40 years ago.
Okay, good. Question for Steve. Steve, the Economic Research Service says a typical farmer, 80 to 85% of their net worth is in farmland values. What could reverse what we've seen? Is this basically a run since 1987 of higher land values? What would reverse that trend?
Well, I mean, interest rates are an obvious answer to that question, but we did a little research early this fall when we were looking at where prices would go this fall. At the end of harvest, okay, we have all these auctions planned for November, December, January. Where are prices going to go? And I was surprised how strong the correlation was between gross income and cropland values. And my study was just in Christian County, just the cropland values for those counties. Take yield times price, and then what's the correlation between the value and that following auction season. And basically, it's about 12 to 15 times whatever your gross is. So we were kind of projecting about a $16,000 to $17,000 for cropland A values, and that's probably about the top of the market right now. Again, that's an oversimplification of it because we're not taking into account inputs, we're not taking into account any expense increases. So maybe we're towards the lower end of where 13 to 14 times gross income. But I mean that's the main driver in the market is where commodity price is at, where are yields at. That's the main thing that drives Central Illinois land values. We have a lot of excitement right now in the market. We have a lot of people getting into the market, heavier than they were, say, this time last year. But, I think a change in price and or softer yields are going to impact it. I saw your numbers on your projected gross. I think you had it going from 11 to 1,000 roughly.
Yep.
So at 15 times, that's a $1,500 per acre decrease next year if we see those numbers. So, that's not unsubstantial.
Another crop insurance question, Jack. Crop production suffers because of supply chain issues. how might crop insurance, I can't get fertilizer. How does crop insurance interact with any of the supply chain issues?
Boy, that's a question that we all have, right? I mean, we all have heard from our suppliers, and the ability to get glufosinate or Roundup or whatever that product is, you put that name in that sentence, and it's a real thing that we're facing this year. And it's something that we've tried to get ahead of and tried to work with our approved insurance providers, come up with answers. And what's the language in the handbook say? Well, the language in the handbook says that you have to follow good farming practices. Good farming practices means exactly what it sounds like, doing everything you can to cultivate, grow, and harvest that crop like you're supposed to. We've asked the industry professionals, and they say that just because you didn't secure your fertilizer, let's say, and you didn't get it on, that doesn't mean that that is an insured covered cause of loss with crop insurance. However, that doesn't also mean that if that wasn't a scenario, but then we also suffered through an extreme drought, that your claim's going to be denied. There may be situations where the insurance company works with you that there's other, that other factor would then be factored into your loss situation. So I guess what I'm saying is that because we have a lack of products doesn't mean that's going to result in a direct crop insurance claim. It is something that's being looked at by RMA, but I think it comes back to communication, working with your suppliers, and trying to get your ducks in a row early versus trying to play catch up later in the game.
Okay, great. Question for Kent. Kent, with these higher farmland values, what role does the investor play? And I'm going to go to our last slide, which is just a reminder of our upcoming program. So go ahead, Kent.
Okay.
What about investors?
I mean, we have seen investors in the market probably the last couple years, and a lot of it is more localized investors, but we've had some bigger players come into the market, and even here in the end of this run of auctions and all, which kind of surprising in essence for us, because it's like, here we are hitting basically all-time record highs, and typically it seems like the investor comes in more on a downward trend or where they're thinking there's a bargain. And so I'm still questioning why that is. I guess inflation, all of these things probably play into that, the volatility of, I don't want to put it in the stock market type thing. All of those would come into it. But yeah, it's been, there's still a lot of farmers in Illinois buying farm ground, but there has been quite a few investors hop into this market this fall.
Okay, great. Kent, you're still on the hot seat here. What role did the potential for higher taxes, especially the loss of stepped-up basis, play in the sale of farmland?
I definitely think there were farms sold this fall because of that. There was that whole potential to lose that stepped-up basis, and I think I know Steve talked to an auction company early fall, and they were saying they were having more auctions booked than they'd ever had ever before, and so it definitely was a factor in some of this land coming to market.
Question for Glenn. What about the issue of $30 trillion deficit? How does that play in the federal government servicing debt?
It's a great question. If you do the math, 1 or 2% increase in the average cost of the debt, 1% is $300 billion. So your federal budget deficit, just by virtue of the average interest cost on that debt going up by 1%, increases the budget and by $300 billion. And so interest cost really is the only debt service that is ever talked about at a government level. They don't ever talk about you know, amortizing a principal payment back. I mean, good Lord, if we can just quit spending more money than we bring in, that would be considered, you know, one of the greatest accomplishments of this generation, of which I'll be honest with you, as a baby boomer, I'm not real proud of the fact that over our adult lifetimes, our governments have tremendously borrowed against our kids and grandkids' futures. That's probably the greatest failure of our baby boomer generation. I don't know what your thoughts are about it, but that's one point that we should not be very proud of, the fact that we have elected people over the last, you know, 30, 40 years that have spent a whole heck of a lot more money than the tax receipts that have come in. So the risk is that every dollar of interest expense is another dollar that comes out of other programs, whether that be farm programs, you know, Social Security and Medicare are going to continue to be a larger and larger share of the federal budget. So we have a major issue coming at us in the next 10 to 15 years, because theoretically I'll retire and hit that Social Security and Medicare age, and not that far of a distant future, and I'm one of the later years of what they consider the baby boom generation.
Been there, done that.
Yes.
Questions that the audience might have of our panel. Just got a couple minutes. Gordon's got one right here. Go ahead, Gordon. Okay, the question again, when was the last time that the land values would cash flow? Are those oxymorons? Land values, cash flow?
I don't think it's been in my lifetime.
Yeah.
I'm the only one up here. I'm the only one up here old enough to have remembered that. It was probably 1986. And I was working, and quite frankly, we were awash with acquired properties, and you know, literally the farms would cash rent for enough to make the payments. We had difficulty. No one wanted to own farmland in 1986, if you recall. And it's probably the last time, and probably the only time in my lifetime, and I'm 60 years old, that I recall that literally people bought farms, and the income from the farm would make the payment and the real estate taxes associated with that farm.
Been a while. Other questions from the audience? Got one here.
I don't think we're going back to the 1980s, and if that's the perception that I've given, I
No, I'm just talking to some people
Okay.
that
Yeah.
have said we're going to go back.
Right. We're in a different time. The farmers are much more sophisticated. We have crop insurance. We didn't have crop insurance in the 1880s. I can remember in 1980, I'm from Jasper County, which is about 100 miles southeast of here, and kind of what we call the old dirt in Illinois. You know, soybeans were maybe 20 bushels the acre in 1980, and corn was less than that. And then we got turned around and had the opportunity to experience that all over again in 1983. And we didn't have crop insurance. So those were just absolute devastating loss years there. So we have crop insurance, which is a wonderful risk mitigant. I sleep much better at night knowing that the farm community has an opportunity for that safety net, because crop insurance is probably the biggest benefit that we've received from the 1980s. The multi-peril crop insurance that I recall in the 1980s was very substandard, I guess would be the only way to describe that, and you probably have.
Well, in
some-
82 and 83, you bought your crop insurance at the ASCS office. So it's like, really? And then we transitioned to, private crop insurance carriers. I was in a bank, so I was licensed to sell crop insurance and real estate and got my broker's license. So we kind of did it all back there.
Yeah.
And I agree, I don't see us going back to the 80s. I think the difference is the media plays such a bigger role, that they're going to feed us with information that keeps us fearful. I think that's the biggest difference. And
Right.
both sides of the political spectrum is you got to keep people in fear. All right, based on the weather forecast that I saw yesterday morning, I should never got on a plane to fly to Springfield, because these were going to be the most damaging winds we'd ever seen in the month of December. This is crazy times, folks. This is crazy times. I think we've got to be level-headed. I agree. I think it's the level of knowledge. I think it's the response that we make to each other. I think we've got to be careful that we're not as crazy, as our neighbors. Sorry about that. All right. And stay focused. We've got a lot of things we can control. Glenn?
So I tell the story when I first started with the farm credit system. Everything was pencil and paper, pen and paper. We didn't have computers. And so to do what-if analysis, the best thing you could do was do your base analysis, base projections, take it over to the photocopier and photocopy it. And at that time, it was that crazy, I don't even remember what they call it now, but it was disappearing ink, basically. 6 weeks later, the darn stuff was gone. Thermal paper. I even forgot what it was.
It used heat.
And that's the way you did what if corn fell by 50 cents a bushel, or what if livestock markets declined. That was the only what if analysis we did. Now with computers, you got your spreadsheet set up, and you change your assumptions in a matter of seconds, and it does everything for you. You guys are so much more sophisticated today than the farmers that I dealt with in 1982 and 83. And you can change your agronomic practices so much quicker to adjust. We know a lot more about the agronomic practices than we did back then. We're just a much, much more sophisticated and knowledgeable society, and computerization has been a wonderful thing.
And farming demographics have changed a lot. Neither of my grandmothers ever worked a day in their life. They were housewives, they were farm wives, and I think you see a lot of operations today, both the husband and the wife might have non-farm income coming in.
I was here 4 or 5 years ago, and I remember my theme. My presentation was called Controlling the Crop Controllables. I think we've got to go back. I think we've got to focus on the things that we can control and try to reduce the noise. We can't turn on the TV or the radio or our computers with all this outside noise, and especially between now and March Madness. We better control the noise, because we've got decisions to make. We can manage this crop revenue risk because we've got better tools, we've got better resources, and we've got knowledgeable people that we can surround ourselves with. So any other closing comments? You can see the slide. Gordon, you get the last question here, buddy. Yeah, Glenn? Carbon markets. Let's go. Put you on the spot, buddy, and then here comes the next farm bill.
I'll advise you to attend that meeting. Go to that meeting and listen. That's my advice.
I agree with that. You're completely out of my area of knowledge. I don't understand that at all. Neither do we. Okay, well, thank you, because I was like, there's no place to hide up here right now.
Well, I'll put my bias is that Iowa State spent a lot of time and money on this carbon market. And I look at it as a big picture. You've got better things to do, and I use $20 an acre. You're chasing $20 an acre with a $900 an acre cost of production on corn and probably $600 cost of production on soybeans. I think there's better places to put our time. Control the crop controllables. Good question. Amy, I think we're done. Let's give the panel a round of applause.